Hey guys, tonight we slip back to a time when everything looked proper, sounded proper, and absolutely reeked of coal smoke and lavender water. You're about to spend an entire day inside the walls of an Edwardian home, maybe not quite Downton Abbey, but close enough to spot the dust mites under the silver. This is daily life around 1910, and you, lucky you, are one of the family. You're lying in bed, wrapped in sheets so stiff they could stand on their own. The air is cold, no central heating here, and your breath clouds faintly in the pale morning light. Your mattress is stuffed with horsehair. The pillows feel like they've been filled with regret and goose feathers, and your neck is cricked from sleeping almost bolt upright. Still, it's peaceful. That is, until the door creaks open, and in pads your housemaid, already scrubbed and dressed in stiff black and white, bearing a pitcher of warm water and a polite cough. No alarm clocks, no smartphone buzz, just the gentle rattle of china as your wash basin is filled, and the brush of the maid's footsteps as she disappears. If you're of the upper middle class or better, you won't lift a finger yet, not even to pull back the drapes. Someone else will do that too. Now, if you're the man of the house, you might stretch and groan your way into the morning before slipping into your dressing gown. If you're the lady, things are a bit more elaborate. A maid helps you out of your nightgown, into your corset, and finally into the breakfast ensemble. Yes, there's an outfit specifically for eating toast and sipping tea. Why? Historians still argue whether it was purely about class signaling or simply because Edwardians really loved a good wardrobe change. You shuffle toward the washstand. There's a cracked bar of carbolic soap, and the water's gone lukewarm already. No indoor plumbing in the bedrooms. Your bath, if you get one today, is being dragged upstairs in heavy pails. There's a jug, a basin, and a sponge that's seen better centuries. Downstairs, the household is already alive. Cook's been up since dawn, sweating over a coal-fired range, preparing your breakfast. The boot boys blackened your shoes, and the butlers polished the silver cruet set until it gleams like Judgment Day. You, meanwhile, are staring at a mirror that slightly distorts your face. Edwardian glass isn't quite as forgiving as Instagram filters. Here's a quirky tidbit. Upper-class Edwardians often slept in rooms entirely separate from their spouses. Marriages were more business contract than cuddlefest, and separate bedrooms helped keep things proper, not to mention avoiding each other's snoring. You might meet your spouse at breakfast, maybe, if you're both up in time. Outside, the world stirs. Horse hooves clatter on cobblestones. Somewhere, someone is already yelling at a delivery boy for bruising a tomato. And inside your own home, there's a hushed bustle. Nothing too noisy. The upper classes prefer their domestic staff to be as invisible as possible. There are even special noiseless bells and soft-soled shoes designed to keep servants stealthy. Honestly, if you hear too much noise from the help, it's practically a social emergency. As the light rises and the house warms a little, thank you many inconveniently placed fireplaces, you begin to think of the day ahead. Your life, dear Edwardian family member, is stitched together with routine, ritual, and 1,000 unspoken rules. Whether you're a daughter hoping not to be married off to some distant cousin with a mustache, or a son worrying about inheriting the estate without scandal, your morning thoughts probably don't include anything as wild as, say, voting. Not yet, anyway. There's a knock. Breakfast is ready. You sigh, stretch one last time, and steel yourself for a full day of being impeccably dressed, uncomfortably formal, and constantly aware of how many buttons you're wearing. Spoiler, it's always too many. Your morning has begun. You make your way down the staircase, careful not to slip on the polished steps. The banister is cold to the touch, and the whole house carries that faint smell of boiled wool and coal smoke, with just a whisper of lemon oil from yesterday's polish. Somewhere a clock chimes the half hour. Breakfast is expected to begin precisely. This is Edwardian England, after all, and meals come with timetables, not flexibility. breakfast room, sunlight pours weakly through tall windows, half covered by lace curtains. You take your seat at the long table. If you're the man of the house, your newspaper is already folded next to your plate, waiting for your silent scowl. If you're the lady, you're probably already thinking about how long it'll take to get into your day dress after this. And if you're one of the children, you've got to mind your posture. Speak only when spoken to, and absolutely never ever put jam on your sausage. Yes, that happened once, and Aunt Millicent still hasn't recovered. Before you is a spree. That looks lovely, assuming you're in the drawing room class. There's porridge, thick and steaming, often made the night before and reheated into something resembling mortar. There's toast, dry and barely warm, with silver pots of marmalade and jam. Eggs, poached or boiled, never scrambled, sit under a dome to keep them tepid. Rashers of bacon, possibly streaked with more fat than meat, wait next to kidneys and grilled tomatoes. And of course the tea. Strong, dark, and poured from a pot that might have belonged to your great-grandmother. You might be surprised by how little people actually eat, especially the ladies. Breakfast isn't exactly a feast unless you're a working man or a teenage boy. In fact, some upper-class women nibble almost nothing, sipping tea, and maybe picking at a slice of melon, which is considered fashionable and light. That melon, by the way, probably arrived yesterday by train and cost more than your footman's weekly wages. Now here's a reality check. If you're not part of the wealthy elite, your breakfast is a much simpler affair. Maybe tea and a slice of bread with dripping, maybe a bit of fish if you're near the coast. If you're a servant, you eat quickly and quietly in the kitchen, usually standing, before the family finishes ringing bells for toast that's slightly too brown. There's even a specific way to butter your bread. Use a small side knife. Spread each bite individually, and for heaven's sake, don't smother it. This isn't a pub. This is Edwardian breakfast, where etiquette goes down easier than the eggs, and yet all this quiet civility hides the hum of labor behind the scenes. The cook has been sweating in a cramped kitchen since before dawn. The scullery maid, probably no older than 15, has scraped out the range, hauled water, cleaned ashes, and washed dishes before most of the household even stirred. Historians still argue whether this rigid hierarchy helped maintain order or simply ensured generations of quietly bitter service. And let's not forget one peculiar detail. Toast racks. Edwardians were obsessed with these odd little wire contraptions that made sure your toast cooled evenly, so it was always crunchy and just a bit too cold by the time it reached your mouth. And yet, no breakfast table was complete without one. In fact, toast racks were so common, they show up in wills. That's right, people bequeathed their toast racks. You glance around the room. Conversation is minimal. Perhaps father grumbles about politics while reading the Times, or mother mentions a cousin's engagement. There's a comforting clink of porcelain, the rustle of napkins, the occasional cough. Children are expected to be almost silent. A glance from your governess or nanny is enough to turn you to stone. As the meal winds down, the staff begins clearing away plates. It's all done with practiced, quiet efficiency. The butler nods, the parlor maid hovers, and the silverware glints like tiny soldiers ready for inspection. You rise from your seat slowly, with practiced elegance, and murmur a thank you to no one in particular. Back in your room, the day looms. You've eaten. You've been mildly judged for how you hold your spoon. And now it's time to get properly dressed. But before that, you sneak one more cup of tea, just the way you like it. Strong enough to dissolve your worries, and sweet enough to make even the stiffest Edwardian morning a little softer. You're back upstairs, standing in your dressing room or at the foot of your bed, depending on your status and how many rooms you're allowed to claim. Either way, it's time to transform. And no, this isn't as simple as throwing on jeans and a hoodie. Dressing in Edwardian England is practically a team sport, and you're not even the captain. Your valet, or lady's maid, stands at the ready. They've already laid out your attire, chosen not for comfort or even practicality, but to make sure you look like you've never heard of manual labor. You're still in your breakfast attire, and that simply won't do for facing the rest of the day. Edwardians changed outfits, like some people change moods, frequently and with flair. Gentlemen start with the basics: drawers, undershirt, socks, gartered, of course, and a starched collar that could probably slice an apple. Then comes the shirt, trousers, or breeches, depending on what you're doing today. Waistcoat, tie or cravat, jacket and shoes, polished to a mirror shine. If it's chilly, add a morning coat. If you're particularly dashing, maybe a boutonniere. Oh, and a pocket watch, tucked into the waistcoat with a gold chain dangling just right. Ladies, your journey is more athletic. First, the chemise, plain white linen, soft and absorbent, a buffer between you and the corset. Then the corset itself, pulled tight by a maid who has definitely taken out her daily frustrations on the lacing. You breathe shallowly because deep breaths. Those are for peasants. Over that, a corset cover, then drawers. Open crotch, yes, you hear, Voss. Right, and several layers of petticoats. And now, the dress. It might be a simple day gown or something fancier, depending on your engagements. High collars, full sleeves, tiny buttons, and at least one bow that serves no purpose but takes 20 minutes to get straight. Historians still argue whether these elaborate clothes were designed for beauty, social control, or simply because someone really liked buttons. You try not to sneeze. Why? Powder. The face powder is heavy, slightly chalky, and may or may not contain lead. Your hair is pinned into submission, possibly with the help of a rat, not the rodent, thank goodness, a fabric form to add volume. If you're especially stylish, you might add a hat so large it has its own wind resistance. One famous milliner boasted he could fit a full garden scene onto a bonnet, complete with tiny swans. Dressing isn't just about vanity, it's about class. Every stitch of clothing, every thread, every heel height sends a message. Even handkerchiefs are ranked. You'd never be caught with the wrong hem lace, or heaven forbid, mix up morning jewelry with your casual brooches. Yes, morning attire is its own fashion universe. Lost a distant cousin twice removed, black crepe for a week, lost your husband, full mourning, no color at all. For up to 2 years. The rules are as unbending as your corset. Downstairs, the servants have already judged your choices. Silently, of course. But that slightly raised eyebrow from the housemaid? That's because you wore last season's shoes with this season's hemline. Scandalous. There's something else to mention. Your clothes aren't just uncomfortable, they're loud. The rustle of taffeta, the creak of leather boots, the clink of watch chains, all these sounds become part of the daily soundtrack. Even walking across the floor in full Edwardian garb feels like a miniature parade. For working-class families, the process is simpler, but still deliberate. You might have 2 dresses total, one for Sunday and one for the rest of the week. Boys wear short trousers until they graduate into long ones, usually around age 12. Everyone tries to keep things patched, clean, and presentable because ragged clothes suggest laziness, not poverty. That's just how harsh the judgment runs. Of course, not everyone wears a corset. Some of the more progressive, artistic types, think bohemians, suffragettes, or eccentric aunts, are experimenting with less restrictive clothing. One quirky fact: there was a brief Edwardian fashion trend for health corsets, which claimed to be better for the spine, but mostly made you look like a lumpy hourglass. Once dressed, you check yourself in the mirror. You look proper, polished, and a little like you're about to faint. Perfect. You're ready for the next part of the day. Facing the world, or at least the drawing room, with all the quiet authority of someone wearing 13 separate garments. You're finally dressed, or rather constructed, and the house is beginning to buzz with its daytime rhythm. Downstairs, Breakfast dishes clatter behind closed kitchen doors. The scent of boiled linen floats faintly from the scullery. And in the nursery wing, life for the younger members of the Edwardian household is in full, tightly regulated swing. If you're a child in an Edwardian family, your day is already plotted like a military campaign. You wake early, of course, not with your parents, but in the nursery or schoolroom, depending on your age and gender. There's no cuddling under warm blankets while cartoons play in the background. Instead, there's a brisk wash in lukewarm water, followed by a stern dressing session handled by the nursemaid or governess. You, tiny human, are expected to present yourself in good form. Boys wear sailor suits, knickerbockers, or tailored jackets that make them look like miniature diplomats. Girls are stuffed into starched dresses with giant bows and a haunting awareness of posture. God help you if you slouch. And don't even think about skipping your daily brushing of both teeth and hair. The hair takes longer, always does. Children are officially seen and not heard unless they're in trouble, at which point they are heard only by the staff, who deal with discipline before it reaches the parents. There's no time-out corner here. There are silent glances, missed puddings, and the very real threat of being sent to bed early. In some stricter households, a thin birch rod still hangs on the wall, more as a warning than a tool. At least hopefully. Your day, if you're fortunate enough to be upper middle class or gentry, is guided by tutors and governesses. Boys study Latin, Greek, mathematics, and history, often with an eye toward university or military service. Girls focus on French, piano, watercolors, and needlework. Maybe some literature if you're lucky. The idea isn't necessarily to educate you into brilliance, but to make sure you look smart enough at dinner parties.
There's a curious gender split. While boys are eventually sent away to boarding schools, Harrow, Eton, or somewhere similarly soaked in tradition, girls often remain at home longer, learning to be accomplished. A musical daughter is an ornament. A clever one? That depends. Historians still argue whether the Edwardian era encouraged a slow evolution of gender roles, or simply dressed its daughters in softer shackles. But not all Edwardian children are rehearsing piano pieces in sunlit rooms. Outside these well-trimmed gardens and nursery parlours, working-class children might already be on the job. Some carry water for factories, some sweep chimneys, and many serve as errand boys or girls, hurrying along sooty streets with parcels almost as big as they are. The law technically limits child labour, but enforcement is patchy. If you're poor, you grow up fast. Still, for those in comfortable homes, there is time carved out for leisure. You might take a supervised walk in the garden, under the watchful eye of a nurse with a white apron and world-weary expression. If it's sunny, perhaps you'll be allowed to roll hoops along the gravel paths or bounce a ball against the wall quietly. The more fortunate might get riding lessons. Ponies are a popular choice, especially for girls, because nothing says upper class like a 10-year-old trotting in a side saddle while her governess frowns from a distance. Then there's lunch, a separate affair from the adults. You sit at a small table, food served by the nursemaid or nursery maid, and you must remember your manners. Elbows off the table, small bites, no humming. Dessert might be a suet pudding or stewed fruit. You eat everything. No choices, no complaints. One rather quirky aspect of Edwardian childhood, the children's hour. Around tea time, the family might allow the little ones to join the adults in the drawing room for exactly 1 hour. You're paraded in clean clothes, possibly asked to recite a poem or play a tune, then swiftly return to your upstairs kingdom before you can spill anything on the carpet. It's a moment of grace and performance. And then there's the hierarchy even among siblings. The eldest boy is the heir. Everyone else knows it. Sisters may get affection, but rarely inheritance. Younger sons are subtly reminded of their future in the clergy or colonial service. The entire childhood experience is laced with preparation, not for joy or spontaneity, but for your place in a structure so rigid it could double as scaffolding. As the day stretches on, the children's routine continues, more lessons, perhaps embroidery or sketching, a supervised walk, and always the looming presence of adults who care for you but never coddle. Nanny might be kind, but she isn't your friend. Still, within these quiet halls, bonds are formed between siblings, between child and nursemaid, and sometimes, in rare, stolen moments of laughter during a lesson or joy during a garden romp, you remember that even Edwardian children are still children, full of questions, daydreams, and secret mischief. You just have to keep it very, very quiet. Downstairs, beyond the polished banisters and the quiet hush of the drawing room, there's another world entirely. A world humming with movement, clatter, and the occasional muttered complaint over blistered fingers. This is the engine room of your Edwardian household, the servant's domain. You wouldn't normally see much of this realm. If all goes according to plan, the staff stays out of sight like efficient uniformed shadows. But they're everywhere. Below stairs, behind doors, in the scullery and on staircases you never use. Life for an Edwardian servant is early mornings, endless work, and knowing exactly where you belong in a hierarchy within a hierarchy. Let's start with the cook. She's queen of the kitchen, and don't you forget it. She rules over boiling pots and a clunky old range that eats coal like a dragon and gives off barely enough heat in winter. Breakfast is done, but she's already elbows deep in prep for lunch. Her apron's dusted with flour, her hands are quick and steady, and her opinions, though rarely voiced, are sharp. The family may never see her, but the house absolutely runs on her rhythm. Then there's the scullery maid, probably the lowest of the low, and definitely the sleepiest. She's already hauled water, scrubbed pots, scraped plates, emptied chamber pots, and blacked the grate. She eats last, stands most of the time, and smells vaguely of soap, onions, and steam. You don't know her name. She's not supposed to speak unless spoken to, but she knows everything. Every affair, every scandal, every time your cousin accidentally missed church. Next, the butler. Smooth, composed, and as immovable as a grandfather clock. He knows your favourite wine, your dog's name, and exactly how you like your cigars cut. The butler's role isn't just opening doors and pouring sherry. He's the face of the household, a walking, bowing symbol of respect.
Respectability. His voice is rarely raised. His judgment is always implied. Beneath him in rank is the footman, young and uniformed like a toy soldier, chosen more for height and looks than actual utility. He's there to open doors, carry dishes, and look ornamental at dinner parties. He polishes silver until it reflects his own weary face and tries to walk silently in shiny shoes that pinch. He's possibly dreaming of marrying the lady's maid, or perhaps just of taking a nap. Speaking of the lady's maid, she's the confidant and closest daily companion of the woman of the house. She dresses her, undresses her, styles her hair, manages her gloves and jewelry, and hears every sigh and complaint. She might have strong opinions about her mistress's taste, but swallows them with a nod. Her room is just big enough for a narrow bed and a trunk, and she often sleeps in a corset herself, just in case she's rung in the night. The housemaid, one or several depending on your income, is everywhere. Dusting, sweeping, making beds, polishing banisters, and keeping the fireplaces lit without so much as a smudge on her apron. She knows the creaky stair, the loose floorboard, and how to open windows without letting in a draft. She's also mastered the art of disappearing mid-sentence if she hears footsteps above. Historians still argue whether this finely tuned domestic structure offered security for the working class, or simply masked a brutal, joyless dependence. After all, for the average servant, life was relentless. Days began before dawn and ended long after the household went to sleep. Privacy was a luxury. Days off were rare, and if you were dismissed without a reference, your entire future might crumble faster than a badly baked scone. There's a particularly odd rule of thumb in many households. Servants should not use the front door or even the main staircase. You're not just paid to clean, you're paid to vanish. Letters of instruction to new staff sometimes included a diagram showing which halls they were never to be seen in. And yet beneath the rules, there's life. The servants' hall has its own warmth, its own rhythm. They gossip over peeling potatoes, sneak extra sugar into their tea, share stories, tragedies and triumphs, quietly over chipped mugs. There are nicknames for you, your family, and your guests. You don't know what they are. You probably don't want to. And don't forget the bells. Every room in the house connects to a service bell board downstairs, a masterpiece of rattling brass and clinking chaos. Each bell is labeled, and when one rings, it lights up. Some households even use color-coded indicators in case the staff forgets which room has which tone. If 3 bells go off at once, chaos ensues, and the butler may momentarily curse under his breath before regaining his polished calm. Still, despite the toil, many servants take pride in their work. The best ones are fiercely loyal, skilled in their crafts, and deeply aware that they keep the household from unraveling. And for some, being in service is the only chance at a stable roof and 3 meals a day, however stale the bread may be. By the time you glance at the clock, considering your next genteel engagement, the kitchen is already being scrubbed for the 3rd time that day. The laundry's boiling, the drawing room's been dusted, and the girl who helped lace your corset this morning is quietly mending your stocking behind a closed door. You don't see them, but they see everything. Now that breakfast is a distant memory, and your shoes are shining like polished obsidian, it's time for the gentleman of the house to step into his Edwardian day. And what a day it is, slow-paced, immaculately structured, and filled with just enough activity to give the impression of usefulness. First, the post, delivered promptly each morning, sometimes twice a day if you live near London. It's the gentleman's first true task, sorting through letters. A formal envelope from your solicitor, a note from your club, a cryptic invitation to a weekend gathering in Sussex. One from your aunt in Bath, who still insists on using sealing wax and excessively large loops in her script. It's all read while standing near a side table, perhaps with a monocle dangling somewhere nearby, just in case things need to get serious. Mail in Edwardian England is like the early version of email, but with much better handwriting and infinitely more social obligation. Ignoring a letter is a declaration of war, so you pull out a fountain pen, uncap your ink bottle, and get to work writing stiff, beautifully phrased replies, often on heavy cream paper so thick it could stop a bullet. Your handwriting is impeccable, or your secretary's is. Next comes estate management, or at least pretending to do some. If you're landed gentry, this means reviewing accounts, talking to your steward about tenants, and occasionally glancing at ledgers you don't entirely understand. If you're city-based, you might have investments, properties, or interests to keep track of, mostly through more letters and the occasional gentleman's meeting that involves more port than productivity. One debated question among historians: how much actual work did the average Edwardian gentleman do? While some were genuinely industrious, many operated on what might generously be called the perpetual supervision model, sitting in a leather chair while others buzzed about doing the real labor. At some point there's a walk. Edwardian gentlemen are practically required to stroll. Not a hasty jog, heaven forbid, but a slow, deliberate pace around the grounds or down to the club. Cane in hand, hat perched just right, eyes scanning the hedgerows as though pondering a matter of grave national concern. It's about visibility, status, and fresh air. Doctors of the time were deeply into invigorating air, and fresh countryside oxygen was thought to cure everything from melancholy to gout. A curious footnote: many gentlemen of the era were absolutely obsessed with birds. Ornithology wasn't just a hobby, it was practically a personality. You might carry a little field guide in your pocket, or keep a telescope pointed at the trees. There were heated debates in the letter section of the Times over the habits of the wren. A true scandal involved someone misidentifying a species at a public lecture. Shocking stuff. If you're in London, things are a little busier. You might ride a hansom cab or take the underground. Still relatively new and slightly smelly, to your club, where business is discussed under the cover of idle gossip. Your club is your second home. You have your chair, your newspaper, your pipe, and a deep, sacred silence that descends when someone dares to speak above a whisper. Now and then, you pop into your tailor, just to be measured. Again. Tailoring in the Edwardian era is practically a religious experience. The cut of your lapel says more about you than 1,000 introductions. One London tailor was said to judge a man's entire character by how he wore his cuffs. Whether or not that's true, it certainly made men stand straighter while ordering waistcoats. If you're more ambitious or trapped by necessity, you might have an actual job. Bankers, barristers, civil servants. Their day is longer, filled with office hours, ledgers, court appearances, and occasional lunches that last exactly one sherry too long. Still, even among professionals, the emphasis remains on appearance, composure, and maintaining a life that looks more luxurious than it actually is. Throughout the morning, there's also time for reading. Whether it's The Times, Punch, or a new serial by H.G. Wells, the Edwardian gentleman is expected to be informed. Not necessarily intelligent, mind you, just enough to deliver a witty remark at dinner and avoid looking foolish when someone mentions Parliament. And then there's sport. If the weather is kind and your knees are cooperative, you might engage in a few rounds of lawn tennis or perhaps a little fly fishing. Golf is catching on, though it's still viewed with suspicion in some circles. Hunting and shooting, of course, remain the ultimate seasonal pursuits. Nothing says Edwardian masculinity like standing knee-deep in cold mud while aiming a rifle at a pheasant that's already fleeing in terror. Back at the house, lunch approaches. You'll need to change for that, yes again, and wash up. Maybe splash a little cologne that smells faintly of pine and empire. A servant brings a gentle reminder. You're expected at table soon. You nod, fold your paper, and rise. A morning of letters, ledgers, walking sticks, and perfectly controlled leisure has drawn to a close. Now, on to the next outfit. While the gentleman of the house has just returned from a well-measured stroll and an even better measured conversation about pheasants, the ladies' day is well underway. And it's not all fainting couches and embroidery hoops. Being an Edwardian woman of status means performing a complex ballet of expectations, the appearances, and thinly veiled power moves, all while laced into a corset tight enough to affect your voice pitch. After breakfast, you've had your maid dress you again, this time in your morning dress, which of course is completely different from your breakfast ensemble. The fabrics are still high-necked, long-sleeved, and ankle-length. Heaven forbid someone see your ankles before 4 p.m., but the colors are softer, the details more subtle. You're not dazzling anyone yet, just establishing that you're respectable, well-bred, and firmly within your social stratum. You begin with your morning correspondence. It's not optional. Letters must be answered. Thank yous, condolences, invitations, and that maddening note from your cousin Eleanor, who still uses green ink for reasons best left unexamined. With your fountain pen poised, you compose gracious responses while sipping lukewarm tea, occasionally sighing over the slow erosion of grammar among the upper class. Your writing desk is a shrine to elegance. Embossed stationery, a silver letter opener shaped like a sword, little porcelain trays holding sealing wax and stamps. Everything has its place. One stray ink blot, and you'd think the British Empire had collapsed. Then come the calls. Not phone calls. This is far more terrifying. Calling on someone, or being called upon, is a social ritual that could melt iron. You leave your visiting card at another lady's home, carefully timed and perfectly folded. If she accepts your card and your existence, she returns the favor. If not, well, you've been socially ghosted Edwardian style. No screaming matches, no texts, just a quiet shunning with silk gloves. Sometimes you host morning callers yourself. You receive them in the drawing room, seated on a well-cushioned chair, with a tray of biscuits nearby. Conversations are light: weather, church, mutual acquaintances, and who recently shocked their local vicar by wearing lavender after Lent. You laugh gently, cover your mouth when you smile, just a bit, and never let your true opinions show, unless you're in the company of very old friends or a very tipsy cousin. And then there's the charity work. No Edwardian lady can simply lounge about. You must have a cause, whether it's the Temperance Society, the Poor Law Commission, or raising funds for a new village school roof. Your involvement must be visible, respectable, and preferably featured in The Lady. That way, you're not just rich, you're benevolent. This is one of the few arenas where women wield real influence. They may not vote yet, and they certainly can't own property unless very cleverly arranged, but within the realm of philanthropy, their names carry weight. Some genuinely care. Others, well, enjoy being mentioned in the event write-up, just beneath the mayor's wife. You're also expected to keep the house beautiful, even if you never wield a dust rag. The arrangement of the sitting room cushions, that's your domain. The placement of the roses in the hallway, your choice, even if it means sending back the entire morning delivery because the pinks clash with the wallpaper. Your tastes are not suggestions. They're gospel, spoken in velvet and lace. At some point, you'll steal a few moments for accomplishments. You play a piece on the piano, not too flashy, not too melancholy. You do a few embroidery stitches on a tapestry you've been finishing for 4 years. You write a journal entry full of restrained longing and several botanical observations. Maybe you read a page or two from a novel, something mildly scandalous, but disguised in a very innocent-looking cover. And always, you are aware of your posture, your presentation, your presence. The housemaids pass with their heads down. The butler announces each visitor with precision. You never run, never slouch, and never, ever answer the door yourself. The only time a lady runs in Edwardian England is if she's in an H.G. Wells novel and being pursued by Martians. Historians still argue whether these rituals gave women secret power within a restrictive system, or if they were merely gilded cages disguised as polite society. The truth, like most things, lies somewhere between the teacups and the telegrams. Of course, if you're not one of the privileged few, your day looks very different. You might be working as a seamstress, a governess, or a shop girl, on your feet for 10 hours, your own clothes plain and practical. Your letters are fewer, your hands rougher, and no one's asking for your opinion on the new floral pattern in the dining room. But for the lady of the house, every moment matters. From the cut of her gown to the height of her hat pin, from the sweetness of her tone to the exact angle she tilts her teacup. It's all part of the performance, and behind it, there may be frustration, ambition, boredom, or joy. You'll never know, not unless she lets you. And she won't. Not in public. By the time the clock chimes 1:30, the household begins drifting toward one of the most Edwardian of all social rituals, the long stretch between lunch and tea time, where civility is a performance and everyone has an opinion about how cucumber sandwiches should be sliced. Lunch, you'd think, would be a grand affair, but surprisingly, it's often quieter than breakfast, unless you're hosting guests or someone's arrived unexpectedly, say a cousin on leave from the army or a neighbor with suspiciously perfect timing. It's typically a family-only affair, more functional than theatrical. Still, there's protocol. You change again, of course. Your morning outfit simply won't do. The menu is modest but proper. Cold meats, cheeses, perhaps a meat pie, or game if it's in season, served with relishes, and bread so dense it could sink a ferry. The soup might be pea, or mulligatawny if the cook is feeling adventurous. And don't forget the aspic. Jellied meats are still inexplicably fashionable. The butler hovers, serving in silence, while the footman handles the plates with the reverence of a man handling live grenades. Conversations at lunch are a little looser than at dinner, though still guided by an unspoken script. politics are touched on, briefly and only among men. Ladies might mention a book they've been reading or a new charity initiative. No one discusses digestion. No one. Ever. Once lunch concludes, delicately, with folded napkins and polite nods, the real dance begins. This is the social time, the afternoon parade of interactions, events, visits, and rules you could trip over in the drawing room if you're not careful. You may be hosting afternoon callers, as they're so daintily labeled. You sit in the drawing room, which has already been swept, dusted, aired out, and perfumed with fresh flowers. The china is spotless, the biscuit tin full. Each lady or gentleman who enters performs the subtle ritual of greetings, the exact number of nods, the firmness of the handshake, whether or not to remove gloves. You always do, unless you're merely leaving a card, then absolutely not. One of the great mysteries of the Edwardian social hour is how absolutely nothing is said while so much is communicated. Mrs. Cartwright's raised eyebrow says she knows about Mr. Peabody's late-night carriage ride. Miss Winthrop's unusually bright brooch means she's quietly engaged. And you're smiling serenely while mentally noting that Lady Aldridge dared to bring her Yorkshire Terrier indoors again, despite last time's incident with the antimacassar. You might also go visiting yourself. This involves dressing appropriately, again, being driven or escorted to another home, and engaging in another cycle of polite chat and strategic silence. Tea may or may not be offered. Sometimes, just a card exchange is enough, and woe betide the person who calls too early, too late, or worst of all, on the wrong day. The unspoken social map is dense and delicate. You must know who's visiting whom, who's in mourning and therefore off limits, who's just returned from abroad, and who is quietly being frozen out due to a scandal involving a misplaced brooch, an ambiguous letter, and a suspiciously enthusiastic footman. And then, of course, comes actual tea. Around 4 o'clock, the sitting room is transformed into a tableau of perfect domesticity. The table is laid with fine linen. Sandwiches are arranged like edible dominoes. Paper-thin cucumber, cress with butter, smoked salmon if you're fancy. There are scones, jam, and clotted cream so rich, it should have its own bank account. Biscuits, some homemade, some not, nestle beside slices of sponge cake and a suspiciously glossy fruit tart. The tea itself is poured with ceremony. Black, strong, and steeped properly. Sugar tongs are wielded with quiet precision. Milk goes in after the tea, unless you're a rebel, or just don't care if someone whispers about your upbringing. This tea time isn't just about snacks. It's the beating heart of Edwardian sociability. This is where matches are made, reputations are managed, and alliances forged. It's where a marriage proposal might be floated by way of an extra eclair, or a rivalry renewed over a particularly sharp comment about someone's jam-to-cream ratio. Historians still argue whether tea time served as a quiet rebellion, one of the few spaces where Edwardian women could hold court, exchange ideas, and subtly run the world, or if it was just another golden cage wrapped in doilies and digestive biscuits. And yet, it's not all stress and signals. For a few moments, it really is peaceful. The low clink of china, the warm scent of baking, the flutter of conversation, the rain gently tapping the window pane. You sip your tea, nibble a biscuit, and for once, feel the pace of the day slow to a near pause. The layers of formality soften. Even your corset seems less oppressive, though that may just be wishful thinking. Eventually, as the shadows grow longer and your tea goes tepid, the guests begin to take their leave. There's another flurry of nods, card trays, and final glances. The door closes. The drawing room falls quiet. And in that hush, you realize it's time to change again. The golden afternoon is fading now, shadows stretching across the garden like long, well-behaved dogs. A stillness settles over the house, temporary. contemporary, polite. You've survived the ritual of tea. Your gloves are folded, your cheeks faintly flushed from too much smiling, and the distant sound of hooves clopping over cobblestone tells you the world outside continues its Edwardian shuffle. Which means, of course, it's time to prepare for the grandest performance of the day. Dinner. You must change. Again. No sighing. This is the big one. If tea time is the social chessboard, dinner is the grand opera. And your outfit is your overture. Your lady's maid or valet appears, as if summoned by your thoughts, carrying tonight's attire with reverence. It gleams. It rustles. It likely requires assistance to fasten, tie, or button in at least 9 places. Ladies go upstairs to be reassembled. Hair is repinned with greater volume. Necklines drop slightly, but never too far. Jewelry is selected. Not the everyday pearls, but something a little more impressive. A brooch that once belonged to your great-grandmother. Earrings that sparkle like the chandelier you'll soon be dining under. Gloves, long and elbow-bound. A fan, possibly scented with lavender or clove. Gentlemen don stiff, dark suits, black tailcoats, white waistcoats, carefully knotted bow ties. Shirts so starched they could be used as building materials. Shoes buffed again, even if they haven't left the room since lunch. Cufflinks are fastened with mechanical precision. A dab of cologne. A final check in the mirror. You descend, gracefully if you're a lady, confidently if you're a gentleman, and make your way to the drawing room. Pre-dinner drinks are offered. Sherry, port, perhaps a bit of champagne if it's a special evening. Light conversation floats like perfume. Everyone is pretending to be more relaxed than they are, because dinner, you see, is not just food, it's theater. At the sound of the gong, yes, an actual gong, the assembled party is summoned to the dining room. You enter in order of social rank, which has been carefully plotted earlier by the host. There's a hierarchy to everything. Who sits where, who speaks first, who gets offered the best slice of roast. The table is dazzling. Polished silver, cut glass, candles casting flattering shadows, plates arranged with militaristic precision, doilies, of course, and a floral centerpiece large enough to obscure at least one guest's face. Courses arrive with seamless timing. First, soup, clear or creamy, never too spicy. Then fish, delicately prepared and served with a sauce that required a whole morning to perfect. Next, the meat course, roast beef, venison, or lamb, accompanied by vegetables that have been boiled into submission, but presented like fine art. There may be a remove, a pause, and then comes the game. Pheasant, grouse, or hare, depending on the season. After that, pudding, steamed, spongy, brandy-soaked, and frequently on fire. And finally, a cheese course with fruits and nuts and the kind of crackers that snap like brittle secrets. Each course is accompanied by its own wine, poured by the footman with the grace of a ballet dancer and the silence of a ghost. Glasses are different sizes, hock for white, claret for red, port for post-pudding reflection. It's a liquid symphony, and if you're clever, you pace yourself. If not, well, there's always a story about the time your cousin Rupert dozed off into his syllabub. Conversation is an art. Topics rotate gently. Books, politics, lightly. The weather, the countryside, travel. The eccentricities of a minor royal. The opera, and whether Mrs. Winfield's new cook is actually French or just very determined. No one discusses money, or indigestion, or the fact that someone's corset has been slowly reducing lung capacity for the past hour. If you're hosting, you keep things flowing. If you're a guest, you laugh softly, listen intently, and never reach across the table. Gentlemen speak to the ladies on their right for the first half of dinner, then switch to the lady on their left. Yes, it's a rule. No, there are no exceptions. unless you're Lord Camden, who once ignored both neighbors and spent an entire meal talking to his partridge. Historians still argue whether Edwardian dinner parties were sincere forms of connection or simply grand rehearsals for social climbing. Perhaps they were both, but in either case, they were essential. After dinner, the ladies excuse themselves and retreat to the drawing room, leaving the gentlemen to their port, cigars, and a round of mild gossip disguised as political analysis. The ladies, meanwhile, refresh themselves, chat about the dresses they pretended not to notice, and sip delicately from tiny cups of coffee or liqueur. Eventually, the gentlemen rejoin the ladies. There's music, a pianoforte performance, a dramatic reading, perhaps even charades if things get rowdy. Though rowdy here means someone accidentally says bottom, and everyone pretends not to laugh. As the evening winds down, you rise once more. Thank the host, nod to the butler, accept your wrap or hat or coat from the maid. The night air outside is brisk, scented with chimney smoke and damp hedges. Your carriage awaits, or your bedchamber glows faintly above. You've made it through the Edwardian dinner gauntlet. Full, slightly tipsy, and just a little smug about your knowledge of obscure cheeses. And now, at last, you can breathe out. Just not too deeply. The corset's still on. The night is quiet now, the kind of quiet that hums softly behind drawn curtains and gas lamps turned low. Dinner is done. The last guest's carriage has rattled down the drive, and the household is preparing for its slow descent into darkness. But before anyone actually sleeps, if they sleep at all, there's a whole evening ritual to unfold, because in Edwardian England, even bedtime takes effort. If you're of the upper set, your evening doesn't simply end, it unwinds, like a music box playing its final bars. Back in your room, your maid or valet is waiting, already having lit the fire, warmed your bedstones, and laid out your nightclothes in a way that feels oddly ceremonial. Everything is folded just so. Your slippers are exactly where you left them, except better placed, somehow. You might start by undressing. Not on your own, of course. Your servant assists, unbuttoning layers, unlacing corsets, or easing you out of stiff collars and shoes that have slowly turned against you since 7 p.m. A basin of warm water awaits, along with a soap that smells faintly of roses, coal smoke, and imperial optimism. If you're lucky, you'll manage to wash your face without soaking your sleeve cuffs. And then, into your nightclothes. For ladies, this means a long cotton or linen nightgown, often embroidered and soft from countless washings. Some women wear a robe over it, a dressing gown made of flannel or silk, depending on status. For gentlemen, it's a long shirt or two-piece pajamas, if you're terribly modern, paired with a dressing gown and slippers. The dressing gown is key. It signals relaxation, but only the curated kind. Next comes the bedtime beverage. No, not cocoa, although that does make an appearance. More often, it's something like a hot milk toddy or a warm barley water, served by a sleepy housemaid who probably just spent an hour polishing the silver for tomorrow. You take it in small sips, half watching the fire flicker, half listening for nothing at all. If you're married, well, that's a delicate matter. Edwardian couples often had separate bedrooms, or at least separate beds. Privacy was prized, and the business of marital relations was often treated as a duty, not an expression of affection. If a visit is expected, it's quietly arranged, noted by a candle left burning or a bedroom door left unlatched. But once again, everything is done with such discretion that even the furniture pretends not to notice. As you settle into bed, perhaps with a book or a newspaper folded just so, you think back on the day. You've worn 4 different outfits, spoken to 8 different people, eaten 7 courses, and still managed to avoid the one neighbor who always talks about their prize chrysanthemums. A success. Now let's pause for a moment to consider what bedtime looked like in other parts of Edwardian society, outside your softly lit bedroom and heated mattress pad. In working-class homes, the routine was simpler, harder, and far more communal. Beds were shared, often with siblings or even parents. Privacy was a fantasy. Night clothes might be a single threadbare shirt. Water for washing had to be carried up from downstairs. There were no glowing coals or warmed bricks, just body heat, heavy blankets, and maybe a cat curled up at your feet if you were lucky. Many children fell asleep to the sound of factory whistles or street vendors calling out their last wares. And adults? Exhausted. Sleep wasn't a ritual, it was a collapse. Historians still argue whether the Edwardian era represented the last age of grace or merely the calm before the storm. After all, the Great War loomed just ahead, but in this quiet night, that future is still unknown. Tonight, there's only the present, flickering gaslight, heavy quilts, and a sense that everything will be exactly the same tomorrow. Quirky detail? Many Edwardians swore by bed curtains, not just for warmth, but to keep out night drafts, which doctors believed could cause anything from colds to full-blown melancholia. A good bed had thick drapes that could be pulled shut, like stage curtains on the final act of your day. And then the lights go out. Not with a switch, but with a quiet huff as the flame in your bedside lamp is snuffed. The room falls into darkness. Real darkness, the kind that wraps around you completely. No LED clocks, no hallway glow, just the faint smell of extinguished oil and the creak of a house settling into sleep. Outside your window, maybe an owl calls, maybe the wind nudges the trees, maybe nothing happens at all. And somehow that's enough. You pull the covers up to your chin, let your thoughts drift toward nothing in particular. The day has ended, your house is still, and for just a few hours, the structure, the hierarchy, the expectation, they all melt away until the morning bell rings. The morning bell does indeed ring, early and always a bit too cheerfully. For the Edwardian servants, the cycle begins anew. But for you, tucked warmly in your bed, the day begins with a familiar rhythm of soft knocks, drawn curtains, and the rustle of coal being added to the fireplace. But let's pause the routine just for a moment and step outside, because while the household stirs in slippers and dressing gowns, the world beyond your front gates is moving to a very different beat. An Edwardian town or city is a bustling, smoky, slightly chaotic place full of contradictions. Horse-drawn carriages clatter past early motor cars that sound like angry typewriters. Street vendors hawk hot chestnuts or newspapers. Children in flat caps dart through alleys, narrowly avoiding the lamplighter's ladder. If you're a city-dwelling Edwardian, the view from your front step is a fascinating mix of grime, gossip, and progress. And you do leave the house, often in fact. Contrary to modern assumptions, Edwardians were surprisingly mobile. If you're of the middle or upper class, the town is your playground. You shop, you promenade, you visit exhibitions, and occasionally suffer through a cousin's cello recital at a church hall that smells of damp hymn books and hope. Let's begin with transport. In London, the underground is up and running, still coal-powered and a bit sooty, but efficient. The Metropolitan Railway and its siblings are clanking along under the city like iron caterpillars. Above ground, omnibuses trundle past, packed with passengers. Taxis are appearing too, motorized and slightly terrifying. And for the truly adventurous, bicycles offer freedom, particularly for women. There's even a name for them, the new woman, pedaling her way through old conventions, corset a little looser than before. Public transportation isn't glamorous, but it's democratizing. A clerk can ride next to a school teacher. A governess can sit across from a young doctor. Everyone pretends not to notice the coal dust smudging their gloves. Now on to shopping, which is not a necessity. It's an event. Edwardian shop fronts are a marvel of glass, mahogany, and window displays that could stop traffic. Department stores like Selfridges, opened 1909, are turning shopping into theater with grand staircases, ladies' lounges, and perfume counters so potent they could knock out a cavalry unit. You browse for fabrics, gloves, silver combs, hat pins, and boot polish, all while being shadowed by floor walkers who look like retired colonels and salesgirls who know exactly how to wrap a box with 5 pins and 0 tape. And yes, there are escalators, some of the first in Europe, and you ride them with the cautious pride of someone both amazed and deeply suspicious of moving stairs. There's a distinct Edwardian obsession with novelty. You stop to admire a phonograph demonstration in a shop window. There's a murmured rumor that a cinema might open near the park, showing moving pictures of a horse race or the King's Parade. Technology is creeping into your life, one invention at a time. The streets themselves are a cacophony of social layers. You pass newspaper boys shouting headlines about the Balkans, flower girls with dirt-smudged cheeks, and gentlemen from the clubs nodding curt hellos. Every alley and arcade seems to have its own rhythm. Tea shops buzzing with gossip, tobacconists filled with pipe smoke and opinions, tailors fussing over lapels with the intensity of battlefield generals. Historians still argue whether the Edwardian public sphere truly opened doors across classes, or whether it merely looked more accessible from the outside. After all, a shop may welcome your coins, but that doesn't mean the doorman's going to forget your accent. If you're out in the countryside, the pace is slower, but just as layered. Market days fill the square with stalls selling eels, cheeses, and boiled sweets. Everyone knows everyone's business, or thinks they do. The post office is both service and social hub. And if you're out for a walk, you'd better wave at the vicar, even if he's currently arguing with the blacksmith about fence repairs. And of course, whether town or country, there's always the weather. An Edwardian day could contain sun, fog, rain, wind, and more rain, all before lunch. You carry an umbrella. You always carry an umbrella. It's less about rain and more about dignity. Quirky fact: Edwardians loved walking sticks, not just for support, but as fashion, expression, even flirtation. A lady might carry a parasol, but a gentleman, a cane with a silver handle, possibly concealing a compass or a tiny penknife. Some were decorative, some were weapons, all were conversation starters. By late afternoon, your shopping bags are full, your gloves a bit smudged, and your feet just tired enough to warrant a cup of tea at your favorite cafe. One with high ceilings, wobbly chairs, and a pianist who seems to know exactly when to play Debussy as you bite into a fondant fancy. Outside, the lamplighter begins his rounds. The sky dims, and you, modern for your time, properly dressed and deeply OP, about hat height, head home. Another Edwardian day, another polite whirlwind. Back home now, just before the last of the sunlight disappears, you find the household once again engaged in its endless cycle of quiet hustle. Slippers scuff down hallways. A maid clears the tea service with the efficiency of someone who's done it 1,000 times. Logs are added to the fire. And somewhere in the background, the ticking of clocks reminds you that even in the Edwardian era, time rarely stops to curtsy. But tonight isn't just any night, it's entertainment night, and the Edwardian family, in its eternal quest to remain refined and occupied, has more than a few tricks up its velvet sleeve. Let's start with the obvious, music. If there's a piano in the drawing room, and there always is, then someone, somewhere, is expected to play it. Often it's one of the daughters, coaxed forward with polite insistence and the kind of forced enthusiasm usually reserved for amateur dental work. She plays a Chopin nocturne, or perhaps a bit of Elgar. If she's ambitious, Debussy. Everyone claps gently, no matter how many notes were missed. Gentle teasing might follow. "You'll be on the stage yet, my dear," someone says. knowing full well that appearing on stage is only slightly less scandalous than a public divorce. If music doesn't fill the room, then parlor games do. And oh, how Edwardians love a good parlor game. Charades is popular, performed with exaggerated gestures, theatrical flourishes, and far too much guessing. There's consequences, where everyone writes something down, folds the paper, passes it, and creates a story that almost certainly ends with a duke marrying a crocodile. There's the minister's cat, a verbal game that somehow goes on far too long, and yet remains a staple. Even tableaux vivants make an appearance. Yes, your family might spend an evening posing, silently, as historical scenes while guests try to guess who's who. It's ridiculous, theatrical, and completely normal if you're trying to impress a new neighbor or fill a long weekend without resorting to actually discussing your feelings. And of course, there's cards. Whist is the standard. Bridge is rising in popularity, though some still grumble about its foreign origins. The stakes? Modest. Pride is the real currency. Accuse your aunt of sandbagging, and you'll spark a feud that smolders until Lent. For those who fancy more cerebral stimulation, there's reading aloud. One member of the household, usually the one with the most dramatic eyebrows, is chosen to read a chapter from a serialized novel, or a bit of poetry, or an article from the Strand. It's all very dignified until someone mispronounces epitome, and the room erupts into barely stifled giggles. And if you're not playing games or listening to the dulcet tones of great Uncle Henry reading Tennyson with too much emphasis, you might be writing letters, sketching, or doing needlework. Idleness is frowned upon. Everyone must appear either productive or at least artistically idle. A young woman who merely stares into space risks being labeled melancholic, or worse, imaginative. Now, for a little-known Edwardian quirk, parlor magic. It's true, amateur conjuring was something of a trend, especially for the gentleman who fancied himself both entertaining and mysterious. A deck of cards, a top hat, a coin behind the ear. It wasn't about the trick. It was about the flourish. Some even purchased illusion kits from catalogs, complete with instructions and top-secret compartments that never quite worked properly. If you're fortunate enough to live near a town or city, theater or the music hall might be on the evening agenda, a box at the Royal Albert Hall if you're exceptionally well connected, or, for the slightly less exalted, a program of light opera, farce, or a traveling magician with an oddly Eastern-sounding name. These outings were major social occasions, an excuse to dress even more finely, to nod at acquaintances from across the balcony, and to whisper things like, "His falsetto's improved since last season." Still, not every Edwardian evening is a social circus. Sometimes it's just the family, gathered in the drawing room, fire crackling, slippers on, tea cooling on the side table. A comfortable silence might settle. You might glance through the illustrated paper or stroke the dog's ears absent-mindedly. Your sister embroiders. Your father pretends to read, but is clearly dozing. It's not grand, but it's golden. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on structured leisure was a sign of a balanced society or just another layer of performance stitched into everyday life. After all, even fun in the Edwardian home came with rules: what to wear, what to say, when to laugh. And yet, for all its constraint, these evenings had warmth. They offered connection, creativity, and the chance to momentarily step away from the rigid layers of class and etiquette. For a few hours, the house was just a home. A strange, formal, over-decorated home, but a home nonetheless. Eventually, yawns begin to spread like gossip. One guest checks a pocket watch. Someone says, "It's past 11," as though midnight is a mythical hour best avoided. The fire is poked once more. Chairs are pushed back. The servants reappear, silently removing cups and plates as you rise and murmur your goodnights. And as you make your way to bed, the strains of the evening still echo. Laughter, clinking glasses, the thump of a dropped playing card, and that one unforgettable moment when Uncle Percival tried to mime Julius Caesar and knocked over a fern. Another Edwardian evening, neatly folded. By now, the fire in the drawing room has burned low, the coals glowing faintly like the last embers of conversation. Upstairs, bedrooms hush with sleep, and the house exhales. But of course, the day isn't truly over. Not for everyone. Because while the Edwardian family drifts off into feather-down dreams, the servants' world is still turning. And now, we step into it, down the back stairs, through the scullery door, into the other side of Edwardian life. If you thought the family's day was structured, the servant's schedule is practically militarized. Most begin their day before the sun. The first task? Fires. Dozens of them. Parlors, bedrooms, studies, dressing rooms. All need to be warm before a single master or mistress swings their legs out of bed. The youngest footman or scullery maid typically draws that unlucky shift, their hands forever smelling of coal dust and effort. The hierarchy downstairs is as rigid as the one upstairs, just flipped. At the top, the butler and the housekeeper. Between them, they rule the servants' quarters with the steady precision of seasoned commanders. The cook falls just below, feared and revered in equal measure. She runs her kitchen like a kingdom, where overboiled cabbage is a punishable offense, and a fallen souffle is treated as a personal betrayal. Below them, housemaids, parlor maids, footmen, scullery maids, kitchen boys, grooms, and if the family is quite grand, a lady's maid and a valet. Each role is tightly defined. You don't clean the wrong room. You don't fetch something not assigned to your duties. You definitely don't speak out of turn. Meals are an endless cycle. The servants eat separately in the servants' hall, where conversation is allowed, but only if the butler or housekeeper permits it. And yet, even with these rules, there's laughter, quiet jokes, shared glances, whispers about the odd habits of the upstairs folk, like how Lady Mabel insists on 2 drops of rosewater on her pillow, or how Lord Geoffrey sings to his shaving brush when he thinks no one's listening. Servants live in cramped rooms, usually on the top floor, with low ceilings and cold drafts that even the best warmed brick can't fight off. Privacy is rare, comfort is rarer, but there's a certain camaraderie in shared toil, a rhythm that makes the day bearable, and their work never truly ends. Evenings, once the family is settled and the last plate of petit fours has been cleared, the real cleanup begins. Dishes are washed, by hand, with scalding water and endless soap. Silver is polished, sometimes until 2 a.m., each piece inspected with a kind of manic devotion that would make a jeweler blush. Beds are turned down, clothes brushed, boots lined up like obedient soldiers. One of the more peculiar jobs? Decanting bathwater. If you're the lady's maid or valet, you may be expected to monitor the bath, not just drawing it at the perfect temperature, no less, but making sure no soap residue floats at the top. You might add a splash of lavender oil. You will definitely avert your eyes as your employer undresses, even though they're 3 layers deep in linen. There are quirky facts buried in this routine. Did you know some Edwardian households use bellboards to manage their rooms? A panel mounted in the servants' corridor would ring and jiggle when a pull cord was yanked upstairs. A little flag would pop out under the room name: morning room, master's dressing room, nursery. And whichever poor soul was on duty would scurry off in that direction like a well-trained ferret. Historians still argue whether life as a servant was truly miserable or offered a kind of stability unheard of elsewhere. True, the hours were long and the pay laughable, but for many, especially from rural backgrounds, it meant 3 meals a day, a roof overhead, and a structured path forward. If you played your cards right, you could rise through the ranks. You could become a butler or a lady's maid with access to real influence, because make no mistake, many upstairs decisions were whispered into pillows by those downstairs. And for the family, servants were both invisible and indispensable. Their presence meant comfort, elegance, and the freedom to live without noticing how everything worked. The silverware sparkled, the soup was hot, the bed magically turned down, and none of it happened by accident. Yet despite this, servants were rarely acknowledged beyond a stiff nod or the occasional word of thanks. They were expected to be discreet, silent, and perhaps most cruelly, grateful. There's a phrase Edwardians liked, a place for everyone and everyone in their place. It sounds tidy, doesn't it? But it also builds a world where stepping outside that place, even a little, could mean ruin. A maid caught reading a novel in the kitchen, a footman who dared flirt with a guest, a scullery girl who dropped a family heirloom. Punishments ranged from dismissal to disgrace, and disgrace followed like fog. Still, despite the rigid boundaries, there was pride. A perfectly laid table, a coat brushed to perfection, the silent closing of a door. For some, this work became a craft. For others, it was simply survival, dressed up in starched aprons. Now, as the clocks strike midnight, the final sweep is done. Floors cleaned, curtains drawn, fires banked for the night. The servants climb their narrow stairs, exhausted but orderly, their world still humming behind the walls of the one upstairs. Above them, the family sleeps. Below, the house rests. For now, the Edwardian household may rest, but the social machine it's built upon never quite sleeps. And as the week unfolds, it brings with it a rhythm of routines and expectations, all carefully synchronized across a society obsessed with status, appearances, and the fine art of not saying exactly what one means. Let's begin with the weekly calendar, which for the upper and aspiring middle classes wasn't just helpful, it was sacred. Mondays were for paying calls, Tuesdays for hosting, Wednesdays, possibly a musicale. Thursdays brought dinners, Fridays meant shopping or riding, and Saturdays promised a garden party, or perhaps a discreet bit of gossip over bridge. Sunday was for church, and afterward, strategic walks through the park, just long enough to be seen, but not so long as to appear uncouth. And each of these days came with their own dress code. You wouldn't wear your walking costume to a luncheon, heavens no, nor your tea gown to a morning call. And if you dared attend church in the wrong hat, well, you might as well emigrate. An Edwardian woman's wardrobe was less fashion and more personal administration. Even your laundry had a timetable. Mondays were wash days, a dreaded occasion for anyone not rich enough to outsource the whole ordeal. In middle-class homes, this meant tubs, boiling pots, wringing machines, and steam that fogged every window in the scullery. The entire house smelled of soap, starch, and damp linen. Curtains were taken down. Shirts were rebuttoned on stretchers. And heaven help the person who shrank father's Sunday shirt. But it wasn't all bustle and petticoats. For many, the week also offered small pleasures, ones you might miss if you weren't paying attention. A favorite cereal in the Saturday paper, a long walk down a familiar path, the distant chime of the greengrocer's cart, bringing apples, potatoes, and the odd bit of neighborhood gossip. And letters, always letters. Edwardians were compulsive correspondents. A quiet afternoon often meant writing 2, 3, even 4 notes, thank yous, invitations, polite refusals. You dipped your pen, paused to think, and folded the paper with precision. Envelopes were sealed with wax. Handwriting mattered. Ink blotters were your silent ally. The post arrived multiple times a day, so news moved quickly. You might hear from your sister in Yorkshire by evening if she posted her note at breakfast. Even the children had their roles and rhythms. If you were young and privileged, your days revolved around your governess. Mornings were for lessons, French, history, perhaps a little Latin, or needlework. Afternoons, time outside, under strict supervision, of course. Girls learned posture. Boys were encouraged to build character by falling out of trees or enduring cold baths without complaint. But childhood was a very different experience across class lines. In working class homes, children often worked, some as young as 8 or 9. They sold matches, swept chimneys, delivered papers, or helped in shops. Education was mandated in theory, but in practice, survival came first. If you were lucky, school meant chalk dust, worn readers, and the occasional crack on the knuckles with a ruler. If not, it meant labor from dawn to dusk. Historians still argue whether the Edwardian era was truly child-centered, as later romanticized, or whether children were merely extensions of adult expectations, little mannequins trained for future usefulness or marriage. And in this orderly existence, even illness had its place. Not quite a badge of honor, but something to be endured with a certain stoicism. The family physician was often a regular visitor, arriving in a creaky carriage and smelling faintly of liniment and tweed. A headache might be treated with a brisk walk and cold compress, something more serious. Cod liver oil. Always cod liver oil, or castor oil if your sins were particularly grave. Quirky fact, Edwardians had a peculiar obsession with tonics. There were concoctions for every ailment: fatigue, nervous disorders, poor digestion, female troubles. Many of them included questionable ingredients like cocaine, strychnine, or alcohol. In generous doses, people drank them with the same cheer one reserves for spring water now. And then there were clubs and societies, each with their own meetings, rules, and minutes so detailed they could bore wallpaper into peeling. Whether you were into natural history, Egyptian scarabs, choral singing, or defending the empire's moral character, there was a society for you. And if there wasn't, you simply formed one and made sure the vicar joined. Domestic staff, meanwhile, carried on largely invisible, yet utterly essential. Their week was full of hidden routines: silver polishing, window washing, every other Thursday, floor scrubbing, always on hands and knees, and the sacred preparation of the Sunday roast. They knew the rhythms better than anyone, knew when to vanish, when to appear, when to open the curtains just as the lady of the house walked into the drawing room. The Edwardian world ran on predictability, but it was more than just comfort. It was survival. You deviate from the script too much and you risked attention. And attention in a society built on reputation could be dangerous. So life flowed forward like a slow, dignified waltz. You turned, bowed, took your place, followed the steps. And if you ever forgot the rhythm, someone was always nearby to clear their throat politely and steer you back on track. Another week, another turn around the dance floor of Edwardian order. The days have blurred into evenings, the weeks into seasons, and now the Edwardian household stands not as a moment frozen in time, but as a living, breathing rhythm, predictable, intricate, and utterly devoted to appearances. Yet even within the seemingly unshakable foundation of manners, routines, and monogrammed napkins, change is humming just beneath the surface. And now we've reached the quiet truth of it. This world is not forever. The year might be 1908 or 1910. The sun still rises over manicured hedges. The postboy still whistles down the lane, and the butler still lays out the morning paper in a perfect van. But the Edwardian family, like the age itself, is balancing on the precipice of something vast and irreversible. If you're paying attention, you can feel it in the conversations at dinner that stray a little too boldly toward politics, in the glint in your daughter's eye when she talks about university, in the way your footman frowns ever so slightly as he listens to talk of strikes. The world is restless, and the cracks in the gilding are starting to show. One of the most immediate tremors comes from technology. The motor car is no longer a novelty. It's a nuisance. Streets are louder. Horse droppings are slowly replaced by petrol fumes. Your neighbor has bought a telephone and speaks into it as though addressing a small, rude ghost. And there's even talk of airplanes, machines that actually fly, as if gravity were just a minor inconvenience. Some Edwardians embrace these changes with curiosity. Others sneer. Most, though, do what people always do, pretend things aren't shifting until it's impossible to ignore. Then there's the matter of class. For centuries, British society has been arranged like a wedding cake, neatly tiered, elaborately decorated, and mostly consumed by the people at the top. But by the 1910s, the structure starts to wobble. Workers are organizing. Women are marching. Colonies are whispering of independence. And underneath the polished surface of every country estate, there's a growing awareness that the old ways may not hold. Historians still argue whether the Edwardian era ended when war was declared in 1914, or if it had begun crumbling long before. But one thing is certain: the Great War was the earthquake. When it came, it shattered everything. Sons went off in crisp uniforms and came home, if they came home at all, changed beyond recognition. Servants enlisted, women ran factories. Entire families lost not only loved ones, but the illusions that had once kept everything so neatly in place. Yet in this moment, before the storm, you still wake to the sound of birds and bells. You still dress for dinner. You still send handwritten notes and grumble about the maid scuffing the hallway rug. You hold tight to these rituals, not because you're unaware of change, but because they are the anchors in a sea that's beginning to stir. And what of the children in this house? The boys raised to believe they'll inherit a world of certainty. The girls trained to curtsy, to embroider, to say little and mean even less. Some of them will adapt. Some of them will break the mold. Some will never return from Flanders Fields. But tonight, none of that has happened yet. Tonight, tea. House is warm. The lamps are lit. A servant somewhere is ironing tomorrow's newspaper so it doesn't smudge your gloves. The dog is asleep by the fire. The clocks tick on, gently marking time in a world that is about to be rewritten. Quirky fact to hold close. In the final years before the war, some households experimented with electric lighting, a modern marvel that often blew out fuses and caused fainting spells in guests convinced it was dangerous. Still, people squinted at the future and thought, well, perhaps it's here. And so the curtain falls, not with a bang, but a sigh. The Edwardian family, with its silver spoons, rigid posture, and soft illusions, continues forward into twilight. The world is changing, but for tonight, you pull up the covers. You nestle into pillows fluffed by unseen hands. You listen to the ticking clock, the creak of floorboards, and the distant hoot of a train leaving the station. And you rest. Word count, 1,096. Wind down begins, 300 words. And now the house is silent. The lamps have been turned down low, and the last fire flickers to embers in the drawing room hearth. The footsteps have faded. The night is long and still. You feel the weight of the blankets over you, soft and comforting, like the hush of snowfall outside a window pane. Somewhere a maid snores quietly behind a thin attic door. The dog shifts once, sighs, and returns to dreams of rabbits in the orchard. The clocks all tick in gentle agreement, and the wind, if there is any, brushes past the house with all the urgency of a lullaby. You're not thinking about corsets anymore, not about coal scuttles, luncheon gloves, or the proper angle for a hat pin. All that structure, all that performance melts away. Beneath it, there's just stillness and sleep. And maybe a touch of curiosity for what comes next. You did survive the Edwardian day, after all. A day of starch, silver, shadowed servants, and whispered revolutions. A day where nothing much happened, but everything mattered. You're safe now, at the edge of this fading world, wrapped in the softness of a bedtime tale. No more tea to pour, no more names to remember, no more bells to answer. Let the house breathe. Let the fire die down. Close your eyes. You're home. You're warm. You're allowed to rest now.